I'm not a fan of 8-bit games. My first console was the GameCube, and I usually gravitate towards the immersion of 3D graphics. I hold no reverence for retro games, and no nostalgia for the aesthetic defined in the 80s and 90s. So when I say that I love Shovel Knight, it comes solely from a place of admiration for its creative world, colorful presentation, and perfectly tuned gameplay. It is a title with modern, refined game design masquerading as an NES game. I've played each of the 4 campaigns numerous times, and loved it enough to get every achievement in each game. Coming from that place as a fan, I was curious and excited to jump into the next game to hold the Shovel Knight name. What I found was a game that still had many of the strengths I had come to know and love, but in equal part a game that lacked the design clarity and polish that I'd come to expect. Before I go any further, I should note, there may be design decisions that were made in the consideration of releasing this both as a mobile and PC game simultaneously. I'm not really interested in discussing the nuance of that particular business decision. They're selling it on Steam, so I think it's only fair that I'm allowed to judge this entry as a standalone PC game, just like the others. Before I discuss the issues I have with the game, I want to highlight many of the aspects that I really enjoyed about Shovel Knight Dig. As you are seeing and hearing, the game has seriously excellent audio-visual presentation that matches the quality and charm of the original Shovel Knight games, while also having its own unique style. You wouldn't easily confuse this game with others in the series. It also has some really fun and interesting gimmicks. From the different kinds of dirt in each area to the dynamic flowing water, there's a lot to play with as you dig your way through each run. As a team of developers who probably want players to see everything their game has to offer, I respect the restraint shown to not allow any permanent upgrades, but rather having the players use gems to buy new ways to play with relics and armor. Speaking a little more on the design, I think they picked the right way to construct a roguelike for Shovel Knight, mixing and matching handcrafted level segments together to create a different room each time. The execution really isn't as polished as it should be, but the idea itself is very good. The compendium is one of my favorite roguelike features, and filling it out as you discover new gameplay elements can be very satisfying. Though, I wish the compendium had included a section on enemies, since the game has a lot of interesting and beautifully animated new foes. Speaking of new foes, I'm very glad to see a set of new boss fights that lean into the random terrain generation and make fighting the bosses a little different each time. I'm not much of a daily challenge type player when I play roguelikes, but I enjoy the implementation here that focuses solely on gems. A player who's gunning for a high score needs to play risky and minimize spending in order to end up on top of the leaderboard. One of the first and most jarring changes I noticed when I started Shovel Knight Dig was that the input to talk to NPCs and the input to attack were now mapped to the exact same button. The original Shovel Knight had a great system of pressing up to talk to NPCs, which is an input that does absolutely nothing else in the game besides climb ladders. Forcing this as a context-sensitive action where hazards, dirt, objects, and NPCs can all be in the same room creates a lot of problems as the game interprets my inputs in ways I never intended. Another move towards context sensitivity that I really can't understand is the decision to make the shovel drop an automatic action whenever Shovel Knight is descending. At first I thought it could be a bold design move, but when all the other mechanics are ported from Shovel Knight unchanged, it becomes a huge pain. You can't stop shovel dropping until you land on a solid surface, and you can't rising shovel drop from a standing state at all. I tended to buy charge attack upgrades just so I could stop the incessant bouncing and get back some of the control I would have had in the original game. There's also just a lot of moments in Shovel Knight Dig that feel unpolished or cheap. You can get away with a decent amount of BS in a roguelike, but this is just unfinished. The player has no control over the camera at all, it follows Shovel Knight and frames what it deems important, but that can often mean hiding flying enemies that hit you before you even see them. Other times, it doesn't let you see far down enough, and you have to react insanely quickly to a hazardous area you couldn't have known about beforehand. I haven't mentioned it yet, but the game has a Yoshi's Island style item carrying system. You can carry up to 3 items behind you, either keys or eggs, and if you get hit you'll drop the last one you picked up. I think this mechanic is fine, but you have so little control over your items that creates a lot of frustrating scenarios. If you're carrying multiple keys with different properties, you don't get to choose which one is used to unlock a door or open a chest. Then managing and ordering your items becomes an absurd juggling act. While I really enjoy most of the items and accessories, some of them are pretty clear padding. The ice ring allows you to resist ice damage. This is the only ice enemy in the game, and all he does is produce the only ice hazard in the game, and he's only in one world. Same story with the Wind Ring, making me wonder why they're included in the first place. Buffs that help very little are still better than buffs that make the game harder. The Book of Bomb is one such item that might sound appealing until you use it. Defeated foes sometimes drop a bomb. Now, I would intuitively assume that these bombs would be player bombs, and friendly fire wouldn't occur. Quite the opposite, these bombs destroy enemies, yes, but also gold, dirt, and the player's health. Engaging in combat with this accessory makes everything more difficult. This is also true of the Dirt Wrecker Curse, which allows you to walk and fall through dirt without digging. This seems like it might be helpful, except you cannot control when it's active and the game was evidently not designed for it. A dirt bridge across a hazard is now useless to you, and there's nothing you can do about that. There's other elements brought over from the mainline Shovel Knight games that don't fit with this particular entry at all. This is admittedly a nitpick, but the dialogue NPCs give each run is the same every time, barring a handful of lines that have maybe 3 different variations, and skipping dialogue often has a strangely long black screen. Even in the original Shovel Knight, the bosses wouldn't repeat their lines unless you went back and replayed a level you beat. This isn't like Hades either, where there's more for the characters to say each run, so I think they should have kept the lines to the first encounter only. Some of the achievements rely on the player being lucky and getting the right layout. These kinds of achievements made sense in pre-made levels that are constant among all players in every playthrough. It was a fun challenge that you can engage with using the level of your choosing and your own skill. And that's not even including the bugged achievements. Speaking of bugs, this game has a lot of them. It's one of the most broken games I've played in recent memory. If I were to guess, I'd say that a little more than 10% of all my runs in this game have ended in a softlock, often for particularly simple oversights. In general, Shovel Knight Dig doesn't seem like it got the kind of playtesting that a game in this genre needs, and perhaps the developers underestimated how insanely difficult a task it is to make a good roguelike. I've played this game for less than 20 hours, and I noticed many of its problems in the first 5. It's not balanced or polished to a state that one would expect to be published from Yacht Club Games. Despite the many issues, some of them seriously detrimental to the overall experience, I have to say that I still like the game quite a bit. My playtime as of writing this review is at 18 hours, and it wasn't a slog for me to get to that point. Shovel Knight still feels tight and responsive, the visuals are fantastic, and the music doesn't get old. There is a great core to this game, and a lot of love and an extraordinary amount of effort clearly went into Shovel Knight Dig. It is obvious that this game is not a cash grab or an uninspired effort by anyone from either Nitrome or Yacht Club Games. I think there is a path to fixing this game, and the changes that need to be made to the PC version to improve the experience are mostly small. I hope that the developers take the time to improve this game through updates and seriously listening to community feedback. I had fun playing so far, and I hope it becomes a Shovel Knight game I can dive back into and recommend to others someday. I've never made a game, and I certainly have no personal connections from within the industry of game development. All I can do is speculate as an outsider, but it seems to me the Yacht Club Games may have bit off more than it could chew. A multi-platform release can be an extremely difficult task, especially since the hardware and capabilities of a phone are so wildly different from that of a console or desktop. Stacked on top of that is the seriously daunting task of actually making a roguelike. It may seem appealing to make a randomized game, set up the rules and fine-tune a little, and just like that you have an infinitely replayable experience. However, the complexity of that task becomes absurd when you consider all the possible interactions and problems that could arise. There's a good number of random level chunks, but many of them feel like they were never play-tested, often having obvious softlocks or cheap tricks. A roguelike needs seriously extensive playtesting, probably several magnitudes more than a traditional platformer could ever need with its pre-made room layouts and mostly linear progression. Frankly, it is impressive the game is as finished as it is given the incredible scope of the project. However, Yacht Club Games should be utilizing its massive and dedicated fanbase to help playtest and develop the game together, rather than letting their fans discover all the issues themselves on launch day. We all want the best game possible, and the players can give you valuable feedback before everything is set in stone. Early access would have been the perfect fit for a game like this, and I hope the developers are more open to working cooperatively with their community in the future. As I've said before, I think that the core of this game is excellent, and that the changes required to really let those positive qualities shine are mostly small. I'm going to list the changes that I personally hope to see made to this game, as I believe these will greatly improve the play experience without creating too much additional work. Fix soft locks and unfair traps. I expect this to happen either way, but taking the time to fix not just the particularly egregious soft locks, but also the poorly designed room layouts will help the game feel much more fair. Classic controls. I think the auto shovel drop is cute, but it doesn't really work in practice. Allowing the game to control like the original Shovel Knight that many people play and love to this day would help the player feel more directly in control and allow for much more nuanced gameplay. Implementing this as a feature somewhere in the controls menu would go such a long way to improving the overall experience and letting players use the skills they've built up in the original game. Camera control. I admit this one would take some serious effort to implement, but utilizing the currently unused right stick or the bottom bumpers to let the player control their viewport will make the game much more fair and skillful. Players can look below to plan how they will drop down, or above to watch for flying enemies. I'm not saying they need to be able to see everything in the map at once, but any more control than is currently in the game would help immensely. Reworked item management. Allowing players to set the order of the items that are following them would give the player control over how their items are used and in what order. To balance this out, getting hit could now drop one of your items at random, so you can't keep setting your glass key as your next item to keep it safe. Lastly, listen to your players. Your fans want the game to become the best version of itself, and will happily report to you issues they run into at a rate that internal quality control could never match. That being said, when a game is as mechanically unpolished as this, I think it's better to just be honest and call it early access, so everyone will clearly understand that some of their play experience will be bug testing your game. I don't know how many of these changes will be implemented, or if Yacht Club Games has any intention of improving the game from its current state. If Shovel Knight Dig is improved even moderately, I'd be more than happy to make a video in the future re-evaluating the game and praising their efforts. I really do hope that Nitrom and Yacht Club Games can dig deep and fine-tune the game to the same exceedingly high level of quality as every other entry in the Shovel Knight series. For now though, I don't care to delve any deeper. I'll just wait and see if we get any substantial patches.